Welcome to Forging Plowshares, a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom of God. We hope this part of our ongoing conversation stimulates your mind and challenges your heart about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Please stay tuned at the end of the podcast for a short message about our ministry.
This is Paul Axton, Director of Forging Plowshares and Plowshares Bible Institute. And in this sermon on Friedrich Nietzsche as a kind of exposure of the Antichrist that John is talking about in his letter in 1 John, the point of the sermon is to show that Nietzsche is actually following the recommendation in reverse of John, and in his Antichrist is really displaying a kind of exposure of how the Antichrist may function. And of course, the allusion throughout is the present situation in which we find ourselves, in which Christians and Christian leaders and our president appear to take on the very form that Nietzsche is recommending for the Antichrist. That is, claiming the name of Christ, but reversing his love, reversing his embrace of the neighbor, reversing his inclusion of the alien and foreigner, and really reversing agape love into a despising of the neighbor. This is the Antichrist in John's depiction, and this is Nietzsche's recommendation for the rule that was taken up in Adolf Hitler and I think is being reduplicated in our time, but is a subtle thing in such a way that we perhaps can see it in the Nazi Christians, but we can't see this Antichrist unfolding before our eyes. And so that's the goal here of the sermon, is to use Nietzsche to expose our present situation. Forging Plowshares is a non-profit ministry, and we greatly appreciate your donations, which allow us to continue our ministry of Forging Plowshares and Plowshares Bible Institute. The course coming up in Plowshares Bible Institute will be taught by Ethan Vanderleek. The name of the course is Do Not Let Your Hearts Be Troubled, Perspectives on Peace. He raises the question, what is peace, shalom? And in every age, he says it's worth returning to Christ's promise of peace. My peace I give you. And questioning what it means for us here and now as persons, as the church, as the human race. Peace is something we all desire, yet it is apparently absent at multiple levels of human existence, internationally, politically, ecclesially, relationally, and personally. And so Ethan describes his class as examining peace from various perspectives, a biblical, theological, philosophical, and interreligious understanding of peace. We will examine various forms of false peace and ask what peace is positively, its metaphysical and religious status as a concept and as a lived reality. He asks, is peace possible? How is it to be characterized? How does Jesus make peace? Can difference be understood, lived, and resolved, not in violence and victory, but in cooperation and mutuality? And in the course, then, we'll be guided by voices such as Augustine, Thomas Merton, Raymond Paniker, William Desmond, Rowan Williams, and more. The course will run from April 8th to May 27th, and we will leave open about 20 seats for the course. The price for the course is $150. You can enroll for this course now. Just go to Forging Plowshares or Plowshares Bible Institute and go to Course Offerings where you can register. If you've never filled out an application for Forging Plowshares, please fill out an application beforehand, and then this will allow you to register for the course. But Forging Plowshares does depend upon donations that can be made at the Outreach International website, oionline.org, through PayPal or Simple Give. Our project number is FP3901. Just select our project number when donating. But hope you benefit then from this sermon on the Antichrist versus agape love. 1 John 4, 1 to 8. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now it is already in the world. You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. He who knows God listens to us. He who is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Beloved, let us love one another. For love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Within these few short verses, John, first of all, he gives us a three-word definition of God. God is love. He defines the opposite, the Antichrist, as one who denies the incarnation, the embodiment of God in the flesh. The Antichrists identify they're Christian. In other words, this is a false teaching that is invading the church. So the Antichrist may be sitting right next to you, John is saying, in the congregation. And this is the primary enemy. So this Antichrist is not openly against Christ, but perverts Christ, takes the image of Christ, and uses it for evil. The Antichrist is in the church distorting the gospel. It's a false duplicate, imitating and perverting Christ, I think in a near mirror image, which, just a little tweak here, perverts the original enough so as to create the opposite effect. We lose God, we lose love, we're conformed to the world in and through this false teaching. In John's description, these antichrists are of the world. And this distortion turns the spiritual into the demonic. It turns love into hate. It turns peace into war. And so the Antichrist takes the gospel and turns it on its head. Does this sound a little familiar? Living as we seemingly are in the age of the Antichrist, I think Christians have made a Faustian-like bargain with the political powers and popular religion. Christ's admonition regarding the stranger is turned into exclusion rather than inclusion. His admonition of nonviolence is displaced by an extreme violence. And his admonition of love, the most key command, love of enemy, love of stranger, love of the alien, has become a vehicle of hatred. God is love, and the Antichrist turns God into the devil. Love into hate. This, so-called, in our day, masculine form of the faith, it sees viciousness as virtue, as a writer in the Atlantic said, in bringing about the rule of Christ through a bullying grab for power. Now, maybe this blunt statement, the way I put it, doesn't get at the subtlety and the means of how it is that the truth has been displaced by a lie. And so the temptation here may be, well, we can point out the Antichrist. Can't everybody see that this is the Antichrist that has displaced Christ? And imagine, that everyone can see this is obvious. But I think there is a blinding logic at work which is not dispelled by just saying this. Where hate has displaced love, I think there's a need for a depth of engagement, as Paul says, a transformation of the mind, a grounding in truth by which we can account for this lie. That is, if we cannot name or describe the truth in depth, we may not understand how we might be implicated in the problem. It's not enough to declare the stink to those at home with the odor. And this is actually the metaphor of Friedrich Nietzsche, who recognizes the rot in German Christianity. He calls himself a philosopher of the nose. He claims to smell out in high ideals through subtle traces and trails the secret stains of rottenness. He's saying that Christianity in Germany is rotten, and you could smell it. Nietzsche creates a character called Zarathustra who says, Christians will have to sing a little better song to make me believe in their Redeemer. It is not enough that they roll their eyes to heaven invoking love of neighbor, a command that secretly enforces one's own sweet will. This categorical imperative, he says, reeks of cruelty. John warns of this empty love that would separate the love of God from love of neighbor. And I think that's what Nietzsche is talking about. If someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And so in dividing this love, as it has been divided in the day of Nietzsche, in the day of John, and in our day, we empty out the Word. We turn the Christ into the Antichrist. According to Nietzsche, God, as our own beyond, is the source of the devaluation of the earth and ourselves. And so we're unhappy, we're punishing, we're cruel, because we have projected our own self-image, or some have projected their own self-image onto God. Nietzsche says this God needs crucifying if true humanity is to be recovered. And so Zarathustra exalts in this killing of God. He says, God is dead and we have killed him. And this is a good thing. But of course, what seems obvious is that any semblance of the Christian God is already dead. And the Christianity that Nietzsche is describing is already a practical atheism. If you're not familiar with Friedrich Nietzsche, he is one of the most famous atheists leading up to Nazi Germany, whom the Nazis are going to read and take inspiration from. Nietzsche is recommending an atheistic resolution to the problem of God. But of course, this solution of working within a kind of immanent frame, it really already describes German Christianity, and I think it describes American Christianity. That is, absolute transcendence and the loss of divine immanence is the result of a Christianity that has already reversed the meaning of the cross. The Nietzschean reversal of the meaning of the cross, it already kind of resonates with a Christianity in which immanence is the only practical possibility. This world is the only possibility. And so his recommendation of the Übermensch, You're familiar with the Superman, which of course is going to inspire Adolf Hitler. It's of the same order as a Christianity which needs our thugs to gain control in an immanence divided from transcendence. So God may be love, but that has nothing to do with us in our Christianity. And certainly has nothing to do with us loving our neighbor. Now, Nietzsche is more clever than this kind of crude picture. He recognizes that Christianity has powers of enchantment which need to be utilized. He's really setting up a program of recovering what he calls the will to power. He calls his Antichrist project, and he embraces this biblical term, and he calls it the Roman Caesar with the soul of Christ. And this is in his book, The Will to Power. He says rulers will need to master their tendency toward benevolence and pity. They need to not put it to work in this childish idea of forgiving the enemy. He says the effect of creators must be elevated so that a new kind of master arises. The exceptional situation and powerful position of those beings compared with any prince thereto. That is, he's saying we need a new kind of leader. The Roman Caesar with Christ's soul. And so Nietzsche is envisioning a new Antichrist leader who claims Christ. And what is needed is the Caesar who is no longer constrained by any servile residue to pity or forgiveness. He's going to have to be a harsh leader. And the problem, of course, the Christian God has stolen the power of our creativity. And rulers then need to recognize they can be the creator. They can be the uber ruler. And this will exceed the power of princes of any previous age. And they'll take on a kind of spiritual superiority exceeding hatred or forgiveness of the enemy. And so Nietzsche says this above, this uber, it embraces the extremist promise of human creativity, the highest superiority of spiritual power. Nietzsche is advocating a kind of perversion of Christianity, I think along the line of John's Antichrist. And of course, it's kind of enlightening to see how this works. What he calls Caesar with the soul of Christ, he says will combine the attributes of a lion, the strength, the will, with the characteristics of a child. And Nietzsche describes then a kind of three-stage metamorphosis. Leaders, they may be like a camel. They're strong, but still kind of stupid and servile. Then there's a lion who totally asserts his own will, but in fact lacks creativity. But this lion type opens space for the fully developed child. The self-affirming spirit of a child that is a sacred yes and self-propelling wheel. It is a new beginning of the will willing itself. And what he means by the child is he means the Antichrist. Here is pure, unfettered will, which will focus only upon the self, breaking any obstacle or constraint. And he repudiates any reliance on others. What he's describing is this Caesar with the soul of Christ will be kind of seen as a benevolent dictator. And so Nietzsche or Zarathustra, he says, I don't know anything about receiving, but only about giving out of an abundance. And of course, what he means by this is a kind of self-affirming. It's not for the other as other, it's for me. It is the fulfilled power of the child simply being fully itself. The Caesar will only seek his own glorification. And like Christ, he is both creator and creation, a self-creation, exercising full self-determining autonomy. And I hope you get, Nietzsche doesn't mean child in the sense that Christ uses the term. This is the Antichrist, who takes on a resemblance of Christ, parodying the sacred, maybe invoking the name of Christ, with its enchanting creative possibilities. Caesar with the soul of Christ. It moves, of course, in the opposite direction to Christ's command to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Christ, who would separate the two, Nietzsche fuses them. And of course, this is what I think John's picture of the Antichrist is doing. He wants to reproduce the power of Jesus to evoke a kind of new inner power, the presence of the kingdom, perverted. And so he did not know the no. He was innocent of the will that stands against his, that negates. He is unconstrained by the law, and even unconstrained by the neighbor. Nietzsche would have us say no to the neighbor. Is the neighbor more important than I am? He is clearly intent, to break with any kind of subordination. I am the key, not the thou, not you. And so Zarathustra says, the thou is older than the I, but the I is to be the new crowning achievement of the creative individual. A new form of profound individualism. We need friends, he says, although Nietzsche in real life was sort of a sad character. You wonder if he had any true friends. But we need the friends that could be a festival of the earth and a foretaste of the Superman. We need to use our friends. In your friend, you should love the Superman as your principle. And what finally comes back is my own self. And so the Antichrist does not know of loving God through the neighbor, but there is only love of self. And of course, this is anti-John. This is over and against John. This is what John is warning about. All value is self-value. And of course, there's a kind of loss of value. If everything is the will to power, there is no inherent value. And the whole is really valueless, and truth is really lost, and everything is just the same in this projection of the will to power. And so for Nietzsche, this will to power is all there is. But, you wonder, what's the point of the whole thing in a world drained of any real meaning? He's very excited, and Nietzsche's kind of fun to read. Because this excitement, you can, the horizon is wiped clean and we're free, But of course, this freedom devolves into the worst form of slavery. We can see the end point of this in Germany. In the novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, he has one of his characters say, as if God is dead, everything is permitted. But I think we can reverse that and say, if God is dead, actually nothing is permitted, as the weight of power ultimately crushes everyone. The weight of the law taken into ourselves, it does not relieve oppression, but it multiplies it. Being the law, that's what Nietzsche is describing, power for power's sake, is the ultimate servitude of nothing. And it exacts everything in draining life of any depth or beauty. Now, I don't think Nietzsche was completely unaware of what he was doing. This absolute freedom, even in the way he pictures it. He means it to be a beautiful poetry. He writes this poem. But he says, for me, how could there be any outside me? I'm everything. There is no outside. But I live in my own light. I drink back into myself the flames that break from me. I do not know the joy of the receiver. And I have often dreamed that stealing must be more blessed than receiving. It is my poverty that my hand never rests from giving. O wretchedness of all givers, there is no neighbor, no love, but only the self. Now actually, I don't know if you know the story of Nietzsche, but he had kind of reached the height of his powers. And he's in tour in Italy. And here's a guy advocating a cruelty that is going to be taken up in Germany, in Nazi Germany. And Nietzsche himself is broken. He's up in his room. He's actually in a hotel. And he looks out, and there's a man down on the street. And he's beating his horse, trying to get his horse, with his cart to move. And for some reason, Nietzsche goes down, he runs down there. And to stop the man from beating the horse, he throws his arm around the neck of the horse. And his mind snapped at that point. He never had another lucid moment in the rest of his life. His sister took him in, actually. And by this time, Nietzsche was very famous in Germany. His sister would give tours of their house, and she had her brother sitting there. He was kind of drooling, He couldn't have a lucid conversation. He said things like, I was a writer, wasn't I? It broke him. I think his own cruelty broke him. Nietzsche's atheistic musings, I think they include a kind of failure of Christian thought. But maybe from this darkness, that, both the darkness and light are there in John, I think it points to the possibility of a reinvigorated Christianity. More mature than a striving, for the self, for this kind of sovereignty, willfulness of the self. And I don't think it's a matter of just setting aside self-love, erotic love, but it's actually a passing beyond these things, a surpassing of these things. This desire set upon the self. And of course it implies a kind of unselving, an unselfishness, a giving. But I don't think it's in terms of a kind of innocent willlessness, like without will, but with a willing beyond this, beyond even perhaps good and evil. And of course this is the word John uses. It's the word agape, the word love. There is a higher freedom and autonomy which is for the other, which is already a participation in a love exceeding the self. And this is the only way we really become selves. There is a self-transcending, agape service in which the glory of the self is not the point. Imagine that. Caesar will have to step down from his throne, I think, if he's going to take up the name of Christ. Christ is not a spirit gained through sovereign power. This is Jesus in the wilderness, in his temptation. He refused sovereign rule. He refused to turn stone into bread. He refused to rule over the world of men. He refused a kind of spiritual domination. And maybe in this, our contemporary Christian followers of Nietzsche, they need to understand Christ very differently. And that is the form of Christianity that would do evil, maybe so that good may abound. It's stuck in evil. It's stuck in finitude. It doesn't understand that the evil that it's recommending is really only a parasite on agape good. And it exists because of the patience of the good. It's not crushed, we know from Scripture, because God does not crush it. For the good, God is not a master, but an agape servant. Caesar with the soul of Christ would fuse agape power of service with sovereign power. But this is already a contradiction. Sovereign power is already a failure of the undergirding reality of agape love. And so maybe this is the most, I think that's what John is saying. This is the most radical form of evil. It's not simply the sovereign ruler, the typical sovereign, but it's the power which takes the name of Christ and perverts it, takes unto itself this spiritual power which imagines it's not limited by any boundaries. This is the spiritual corruption of the Antichrist, which would fuse the power of love with evil. And the only power to counter the Antichrist is that of love, is that of agape. The love of God made incarnate in Christ, bringing the love of God within human measure, human possibility, the human realm. You know, John makes an absolute statement. You can't be Antichrist and Christ. You can't hate your neighbor and love God. You cannot exclude, discriminate, hate your neighbor and be of Christ. Viciousness is not a virtue. You cannot be a Nazi for Jesus. You can't be a thug for Jesus. You can't be a white nationalist for Jesus. You can't be an Antichrist for Jesus. Beloved, let us love one another. For love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love.
Forging Plowshares is a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom by providing in-depth, transformative biblical and theological education and discipleship. If you have found this podcast valuable, please remember to share on social media. If you have questions about what you've heard, or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Forging Plowshares or even support this ministry financially, please visit our website, forgingplowshares.org.